Thank you, ASTROTAS, and particularly Carolyn, who's instigated my coming here. I must congratulate you on being here, actually, because this is recognised by a growing number of scholars as being perhaps the greatest paradigm shift in history. You can talk about the Renaissance and the discovery that the Earth went around the Sun and not vice versa, but this throws all of that into the shade. And as it says up there, the most important characteristic of a paradigm is its fruitfulness. NASA scientists, several of them who will not be named, watch what I'm doing and what the Electric Universe people are doing, because there's a whole group of us now working together. Because I've made predictions about what would be found in space by all of the spacecraft that are up there now. Some of the predictions I made were quite outrageous according to the standard model of how the universe works, but with almost without exception they have been shown to be correct. I may talk a little about that later. Now, it just so happens that this evening in Melbourne, Brian Cox will be speaking, making sense of the cosmos. Well, if you want to make sense of the cosmos, you don't listen to these people. He may be a professor, but when you listen to him speak, and from my perspective, almost every sentence he utters has a logical flaw or a statement of fact which isn't a fact. The result is that the story of the cosmos that you see in the media right now is virtual reality. Just like the film Avatar, you can get a computer to generate something that looks like what you see out in deep space, but it bears no relationship to reality simply because the basics of modern science are still a mystery. It's got some, it says here, the all-new show, Brian Cox Making Sense of the Cosmos, takes audiences on a dazzling journey through space and time. This idea of mixing up space and time is one of the big problems. The Electric Universe, on the other hand, deals with science as it was back in the 1800s and the early 1900s, at which time science seemed to lose the plot. In fact, I believe now that it was due to the Great War, as they call it, the First World War, and all the people afterwards were trying to escape from reality. Reality was just too harsh. And so we had, in the art movement, we had surrealism and Dadaism and so on, where reality was shunned and we had surreal images of the world. And in fact, Salvador Dali was heavily influenced by Einstein. You remember Salvador Dali with his melting clocks and weird landscapes? So the point is that not only art entered the realm of surrealism, but also science. Science divorced itself from reality, and it became mathematics, and mathematics is not science. It's a technique for organising symbols. It's a technique more akin to chess playing than it is to science. But what do those symbols mean? I'll talk some more about that later. Now, this little news item on the right came up in the Canberra Times just last week, actually. And it says the proportion of Year 12 students studying maths and science has fallen dramatically in the past 20 years. And part of that is due, I think, to the fact that the sort of picture of the universe that these guys give has no meaning. It means nothing to us. The Big Bang, so what? We're here by accident, well, that's very helpful. And the end is a complete blackout or another Big Bang. What sort of a cosmology is that? It's hopeless. So we need a new way of communicating science, and this isn't the way to do it, especially when it's peddling nonsense. What we have, unfortunately, in the academic world is exclusive jargon. Science is sort of fragmented and fragmented again, so that you get specialties where even people working in the same discipline can't talk to one another, or if they have a meeting, they have to explain to their colleagues what the hell it is they're talking about. And I go to these meetings, luckily they do that, otherwise I wouldn't understand what they're talking about. The peer review system doesn't work. Because it's anonymous, people who've got a vested interest in not having your paper published can do it with impunity. And this is what happens, particularly the sort of work I'm doing. I had to go to the IEEE, which is the biggest professional engineering organisation in the world, to have my stuff published. And when you look at it, modern science is really pseudoscience, because the things they state as facts are not facts at all. But what's more, it's dogmatic. And you can see this with this global warming scare. So those who don't subscribe to the global warming story are called deniers. Now, talking about deniers is a religious term. You know, the infidels don't believe in our God. In this case, the God is science, and that's called scientism. Consensus science. I found that little cartoon just last week too. It's rampant groupthink, because the people who control the funding are the ones who advise the government where the money should go, and they don't want things upset. So the people who get the money are those who are in the political structure. And that political structure is largely unaccountable. Nobody knows what the heck's going on in the back rooms at the universities. But for those people that I know who've been through it, it can be a scarring experience. I go to meetings up at the Research School of Astrophysics, which is a 10 minutes drive from my home in Canberra. And the thing that really affects me the most is to see the talent that's being wasted chasing fairy stories. They're wasting lifetimes of effort constructing elaborate mathematical models. And this idea that a mathematical model can prove your theory is nonsense. And those models can never be reconciled with real-world observations, finally, because, and you can see it. How many reports do we see regularly of surprise at things that have been seen in space? And you can only continue to be surprised if the fundamental ideas that you bring to that science are incorrect at a very basic level. Carolyn said, I want to hear about your story. So I thought, okay, I'll throw in a few slides and tell you about my journey. It seems, when I look back on it and join the dots, that I was doomed to do this from the beginning, because this is in primary school, that Spotty Herbert, second from the left at the top there, was me. I used to read Fred Hoyle, and I would read the encyclopedia and memorise facts out of that and go to school and bore the kids witless at show and tell time. But Fred Hoyle was a favourite of mine because he was a guy who thought for himself. He didn't go with the mainstream. He was not with this groupthink. And he wrote, this Big Bang idea seemed to me to be unsatisfactory even before detailed examination showed that it leads to serious difficulties. The problem is when you hand the problem to mathematicians, they will introduce magical fudge factors like dark matter and dark energy and all of this stuff that's supposed to exist but is unnecessary, provided you understand what's really going on. My story continues at high school, and while I was there, this book came out, Worlds in Collision. It was published in 1950 and was a bestseller in 1950 in the New York Times bestseller list for 6 months. And yet the publisher, Macmillan, was also a textbook publisher. And in an unprecedented move, the Macmillan publishers were forced to transfer the book to Doubleday that didn't have a textbook arm. The reason for that was the pressure from academics who wanted this book burnt, you know. And they were saying they would not buy any more textbooks or have any submitted to Macmillan. So that was unprecedented. This is the kind of censorship that goes on, especially if you appeal directly to the public rather than try and go through the so-called peer review system. So that was me at high school, and I tried to interest other people in it. A few were interested, but the thing that struck me as most odd was that people weren't excited by this, because what Velikovsky had done, and hadn't been done before, was to take seriously the very early observations of mankind of things in the sky and not prejudge them as being a fairy story, but saying, okay, if, for instance, in the Bible it says, Joshua said, the sun stands still and it stood still for about a day. Velikovsky said, okay, well, let's just accept that for the moment. What would you expect, knowing from modern science that if the Earth stopped rotating or its rotation was disturbed on the other side of the Earth, there should have been an extended night. So you go to South America, and sure enough, the Indians there talk about an extended night when all the forests burned and the stars fell from the sky, in other words, meteorite showers and things. He said, okay, there must have been something going on. And from that he developed a theory of interference by planets with one another within historical memory. Now, the scholars who followed believe that he got it wrong by trying to place it in biblical times, or prehistory, 1500 BC, 2000 BC, something like that. And we feel that it was the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, which was when dramatic things happened. But there were echoes down through time which triggered the response in these ancient civilizations to remember and to be fearful of comets. We've never understood why we are fearful of comets until Velikovsky figured it out. So I went to university and I did physics. And above the physics main entrance was this thing which you can hardly read there. It was embossed in sandstone. It says the School of Natural Philosophy. Now that's what physics used to be. And natural philosophy meant that you could range across any subject and try and draw the threads together so that all of the ideas converged and you ended up with a theory which answered any question. And in fact that's what cosmology should do. But cosmology says nothing about life, about our condition, our history, our future, that makes any sense at all or is even interesting. Of course, I started talking about Velikovsky there, and I found that either the answers I would get answered the question that they wanted to answer, but not mine, or I got hostility from lecturers and other staff, and that tended to give me a rather jaundiced view of academia, because as a bright-eyed student, you go to university thinking, this is a place I can enter into discussion about anything and get sensible responses. Didn't work that way. I persevered though and got my degree and went on to start research in upper atmosphere research, but left within the year to join IBM because I realised that for a heretic there is no place in science or in academia. Now in the 1970s, so I left university, about 1964. The early 1970s, I found out about the Talbot brothers, Stephen on the right and Dave Talbot on the left. In fact, Velikovsky's got his back to us in that photo on the left. They published 10 issues of a student magazine in Portland, Oregon called Pensée, and they devoted 10 issues to the Velikovsky question. And a whole lot of scholars got involved in really good, proper academic discussion about Velikovsky's work. And that to me was a tremendous thing. So in 1974, Stephen Talbot invited me to come over for the first international conference devoted to Velikovsky. And the title of the conference was Velikovsky and the Recent History of the Solar System. Now, according to astronomers, there is no recent history. You talk millions or billions of years for anything significant to have happened. But we're talking about within the memory of mankind. I went over there, I met Velikovsky at that conference, and he referred to me obliquely in one of his addresses as one of the people who'd come from the ends of the earth to the conference. And I actually sat next to Dave Talbot at the final banquet evening, and we talked about things, but I had no idea that he was working on this Saturn myth, because one of the hints that Velikovsky had dropped was that in the past, the dimmest memory of mankind, Saturn was referred to as the sun. In fact, the words that were used by the Greeks and the Romans, and that Sol and Helios, were all names of the sun. Of Saturn. And it's only later it was transferred to the sun, because we thought, well, there's only one sun in the sky. But even the Australian Aborigines know there was 2 suns in the sky at one stage. And I've got a little book at home which has illustrations by an Aboriginal child of one of these Aboriginal legends, and all of the fanciful details in it fit the electric universe model. Okay, so that was 1974. This is the conference itself. That was a photo I took of Velikovsky from the stage. He was answering questions. It impressed me the way he'd cut through to the heart of it. Somebody asked a question, he'd cut through to the argument, straight to the heart of it. On the right I've put up what we now know, because at the time the idea that the solar system had suffered any kind of interactions between planets was completely dismissed. You know, it's just impossible. It doesn't obey Newton's laws. What we now know is that our solar system is weird, because we've looked at 2,000 or more solar or planetary systems of other stars nearby, and none of them look like ours. Maybe 1 or 2 just a little like ours. All the rest are weird. So is our solar system weird? It's been decided that Uranus and Neptune, the outermost gas giants, could not have formed where we see them. There wouldn't have been enough time since the beginning of the solar system for them to have accreted enough material to form those planets. So then they had to scratch their heads and they said, well, maybe the planets move. Well, this is what Velikovsky said, only his was a bit more dramatic. So now rearrangement of orbits has happened. That's been accepted simply because some of the extrasolar systems have gas Jupiters whizzing around their star in a few days, well inside the orbit of Mercury. And they said, how the hell does that happen? Because these gas giants are supposed to form at some large distance away from the star, otherwise the gas would be blown away by the star. So the standard theory of how solar systems formed is wrong. What's more, we've found impossible stars, stars that are doing things or of a size or a brightness that don't match the theory, and exoplanets that orbit backwards and over the poles of the star, you name it. Weird. The next part of my journey was to read what Ralph Jurgens had written. Now, Ralph Jurgens, in my opinion, was as great a genius in his own way as Velikovsky, and the two of them had teamed up in some respects because Ralph was a brilliant engineer who looked at the sun from a completely new angle. And in 1972, he proposed a gas discharge model of the sun. Now, if you've seen those tubes where they set off an electric discharge and you see glowing streamers inside, and then as you reduce the gas pressure it becomes a glow and the little bars move up and down, all those strange phenomena, he looked at it in detail for the sun and said, I can give you a model of the sun which explains all of the features on the sun. And that, to me, immediately, intuitively, I knew was the way to go. He also developed detailed explanations of electrical scarring of the Moon and Mars. It's interesting to think about it, you know. We're told that all of those craters on the Moon are caused by impacts, but all those impacts would have had to have happened vertically, straight down to form the circular craters. Well over 90% of the craters on the Moon are perfectly circular, there's no sign of damage around them, and it's as if they've been excavated by a drill and the material removed. There's only one thing that can do that, a lightning bolt. And in fact, he figured out that an earthly lightning bolt, the power of an earthly lightning bolt striking the Moon would create a circular crater about 70 feet across. Sorry, I hadn't converted that to metres. So, in 1979, in April, I was at that time working for the government in Washington, and I rang Velikovsky and I reminded him that we'd met a few years earlier at that conference, and I had the whole family with me, and I suggested that we might drive up and visit. I had a question for him. He graciously said yes and invited us up, and he and his wife Elisheva entertained us for an afternoon, in which time I spoke about the problem that he'd faced with his initial onslaught with that book, Worlds in Collision. And I said to him, what is it we don't understand about gravity? Because obviously what happened if it happened in mankind's memory, then how come the solar system looks like clockwork now? So stable. Something's going on. Gravity can't explain it, because gravity has no way of restoring things if something goes out of kilter. It gets more out of kilter, in fact, if gravity is the only force acting. So he went up to his upstairs library, which I didn't get to see, unfortunately, and came back with a very slim volume which he gave me, which is that on the right. And that was written back in the 1940s, called Cosmos Without Gravitation. And his thesis was that it was effectively a kind of leftover electrical force, because all matter is made up of positive and negative charge, but it can't all occupy the same place, which means that all particles are made up of tiny little electric dipoles. And I won't go into the details, but the result is that you can actually explain gravity and magnetism in terms of just the structure of matter, electrical structure of matter. And that's one of the reasons for the title of my work, The Electric Universe. So that was in 1979. It was only 6 months before both he and Ralph Jurgens died, which was a great blow. But having had this clue, I was looking at a Scientific American in 1981, and there was a tiny little advertisement, the Journal of Classical Physics, because I'd long ago realised that we had to go back to the science before the beginning of the 20th century. We had to sort of go back to get to the future. Now this fellow had written he was actually the editor as well. His first issue was electron structure. Now all physics textbooks will tell you that an electron is a point particle, which is a physical impossibility. It has no structure. But this guy had managed to derive all the laws of magnetism from that simple, central idea. So and this is another thing about the electric universe, it shows that there are repeated patterns at different scales. And this is also something that you expect in nature. And what he did was to take the model of the atom, with the nucleus, the positive nucleus and all the electrons whizzing around, and said, okay, what if the little particles that are whizzing around inside that atom are also made up of little solar systems as well? And in doing that, you can then derive gravity and magnetism simply from electrical laws. You don't have to mess around with warp space and all this nonsense. If you can tell me how a piece of meat on a butcher's scale warps space so that it registers the weight it does on the scale, then you deserve more than a Nobel Prize. So it explained gravity simply and discards also this other nonsense, the idea that light can be either a wave or a particle. Crazy. I mean, you can almost imagine it on the scale of light waves, because light waves are so very tiny. But what about a radio wave? That's an electromagnetic wave, just like light, that's kilometres long. What sort of particle is that associated with? It makes no sense. It shows that at the heart of physics there are huge mysteries which remain for the future, and which I would like to see our students enthused with, so that they go back to school and take up science. This is a physicist from Alberta, Lethbridge University. While I was in London, I was a member of the Society for Interdisciplinary Studies. The reason for that is that group was set up to study Velikovsky, and Velikovsky's work is interdisciplinary. And this is how science should be. There should be no boundaries, no separate disciplines. He actually visited me in Australia and stayed with me during the Halley's Comet arrival. But he was very close to Jurgens and knew Jurgens and Velikovsky because he lived in Canada, better than I did. And he says the conspiracy of silence which was imposed by powerful scientists in 1950 upon Velikovsky's work remains essentially intact today in the halls of academia, and nothing has changed. It's over 60 years. This is how slow it can be to wait for those with the old ideas to get out of it. Yeah, and let the young ones take over. And we're trying to get young ones involved. At our annual meetings now, we give scholarships to students who write to us and explain why they would like to come to our meetings. And that's been fruitful. 2 of them are now working in laboratories. So, what goes on inside stars is a sort of fantasy. Can you imagine that? All these stories about we're going to produce nuclear fusion like the sun. How are you going to do that when you don't know how the sun works? We all subscribe to because none of us have seen what happens inside stars. All we can observe is the radiation that emerges from the star's surfaces and what happens to the atmosphere transmitting that radiation. And that's precisely what Ralph Jurgens worked with. He was looking at what we can see. And he said the major solar spectroscopic identifications, that is, the elements that you see in the sun spectrum, represent much more dense materials than implied by the defined density of the sun. The very idea that an object forms out of the lightest gas, the lightest element we know, and nothing else is absurd. Because in the sun spectrum we see iron and the calcium and all of the heavier elements represented in the spectrum. So the sun has to be composed to some extent of those elements, and if it's in their upper atmosphere, it suggests that there is a lot of it inside the sun. Then there's this fellow, Dr. Tom Van Flandern. He was a celestial dynamics expert, worked for the US Navy. He showed simply that the speed of gravity must exceed 20 billion times the speed of light. Can you imagine that? It means that the entire galaxy is in touch with each other. And when you think about it, that makes sense. How can you have a beautiful structure like a spiral galaxy if one star at one side doesn't know what the stars are doing on the other side for 100,000 years or more? Makes no sense. They're, in effect, independent bodies. They might as well not be there. This idea of this very high speed of gravity also matches Ralph Sainsbury's view that for little particles inside atoms to hang together, they had to know where each other was at a speed much faster than the speed of light. So we're beginning to see that Einstein's theory of relativity, where he postulates that note the word postulates, that the speed of light is a constant and it's a speed beyond which you cannot go, is nonsense. We need to have matter connected instantly for something as complex as a living creature to be able to function. You cannot wait for the speed of light because it takes a measurable amount of time for light to move from my fingertip to my brain. And if I move my hand, the Doppler effect will mean that my hand is now out of tune with my brain. It doesn't make any sense. To be a coherent living creature, you require that the signalling that goes on between the particles within your body exceeds the speed of light by this sort of factor. If gravity wasn't working that way, then it would be like flinging something in a circle around your head, because the force is acting ahead of you all the time, pulling you around, which tends to fling you out. The solar system would fly apart in a few thousand years. Ignore that last bit, that's from another presentation. I copied this slide across. It's a whole other story. Here's a chap who I hold in the highest esteem. He was an astronomer who discovered that the Big Bang was nonsense. He had the empirical knowledge, that is the observations, to prove it. And what did they do? They took his telescope time off him. He was working at Mount Palomar. And he is the author of the Atlas of Peculiar Galaxies, which was a monumental piece of work. He was looking at galaxies that were distorted in strange ways and discovered some things about the positioning of objects around these galaxies that showed that those with very high redshift were actually ejected from those with low redshift, which gives you an idea of an almost biological growth of galaxies. You know, big galaxies beget little galaxies. That meant that the high redshift, which is supposed to be the signal for the Big Bang, that is, things are moving away from so fast that they're highly redshifted, their signal drops in frequency. A friend of mine pointed out that the little message you get on the car mirrors these days, you know, the objects in the mirror are closer than they appear, applies in astronomy. In other words, these things that are supposed to be 13.7 billion light years distant are actually quite close and they're very young. Redshift is related to youth. Now this paints an entirely different picture of the universe. So all of these models that show you, we've got the structure of the universe, they're distorted beyond recognition. The visible universe, he found, is small and static. It's not expanding. And the greater universe is of unknown age and extent. It stands to reason we're not in a position, with our present ignorance, to say anything about the origin of the universe. There are too many unsolved questions, and since most of science has gone down a blind alley, there's no point in asking them. A Big Bang never happened. That photo on the right was taken at University College London, where he and I shared the podium that day. I was on in the afternoon, he was in the morning. We had lunch together, and after that he and a filmmaker that was with him went to visit Fred Hoyle, and the video of that, those interviews and that were done are available on the web. The Cosmology Quest it's called, if you're looking for it, Cosmology Quest. Halton Arp found that amateur astronomers were better than their professionals. He said the greatest part of the progress independent researchers have made in the past decades, in my opinion, is to break free of the observationally disproved dogma of curved space-time, which is nonsense, dark matter, which is nonsense, Big Bang, which is nonsense, and no primary reference frame and no faster than light information, which is Einstein's legacy. We talk about plasma. This is a plasma ball. You've probably all seen these. And you'll notice how the electricity inside that ball travels in snaking filaments. And this is typical. In space it does the same thing. But in space, because the volume is so vast, sometimes the energy is not sufficient there's not enough gas to light anything. Although radio astronomers can see these things in space. But in the optical you can't see it. But they're carrying current. So that's how current is carried in space. Whoop. Just get rid of that. The plasma is called the fundamental state of matter. It was recognised after the other ones, the solids, liquids and gases. But if you take a solid and heat it enough, it turns into a liquid and then into a gas, and if you continue to heat it, the actual atoms begin to come apart and the electrons leave the central nucleus. And what you then have is an ionised gas or a plasma. And most of space is filled with plasma. And because it's made up of charged particles, it's like a metal, it can transfer electricity. It's a better conductor than copper. But in space, the particles are so far apart that you need a vast volume to carry any significant current. And when it does carry current like that, it's called dark mode because you can't see it. So it's conductive and it responds to a magnetic field. This means that the motion of these filaments is extremely complicated, but that's the appearance that it has. It generates electric currents and forms current sheets, filaments and bubbles. It produces radiation over large parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, and this is what the radio astronomers can detect. We have a radio astronomer who's involved with this work, and he has made some discoveries which help prove our point. This is Tony Peratt. He's the plasma physicist, a leading one, and also the author of Physics of the Plasma Universe, this book on the left, which he inscribed to me when I first met him. On the right is one of these plasma formations. As I said, they can be very complex and very beautiful. And behind that are petroglyphs. These are rock carvings from around the world showing these weird shapes, that they have the features of plasma discharges, all of which has gone to help us prove that prehistoric man witnessed colossal electrical events in the solar system. And not only that, they identified planets with those events. So electricity, like Velikovsky thought, does play a big role. This is just a quick picture of the plasma cosmology view. These filaments, as you see, when two of them cross over, as you can see down here, they're drawn together, and in doing so, it attracts matter over a vast scale. Getting feedback. Over a vast scale, and it produces this pattern. That one. Spiral galaxies. So spiral galaxies are a natural form of a cosmic electric discharge. It's as simple as that. Forget gravity. The powers involved here are infinitely more powerful than gravity. On the right is a picture looking down the barrel of a spiral galaxy being formed. You're looking actually down through the centre where those two filaments are going. It's a pattern you see also on the poles of Saturn, the poles of Venus, which are both electrically active planets in our solar system. Black holes. Now, black holes are a mathematical mistake on almost every way you look at it. It's like the schoolboy howler of dividing by zero. When you've got gravity, which is a weak force, so weak that you could count it as zero against the electric force, and you've got to produce a whole lot of energy in a very small space, which is what they observe in the centres of galaxies, then if you divide the mass required by zero, you will get infinity. So you get an infinite concentration. You know, billions of stars worth of matter in something less than the size of our solar system. So black holes don't exist, but I'm sure Brian Cox will talk all about them tonight. Now these are images in various wavelengths of the surface of the Sun with these remarkable spacecraft that are up there now observing it very closely. I got an email today from one of our people who was the ex-vice president of Lockheed Martin Space Systems and was involved in this sort of work, and he knows the scientists. And he sent me an email this morning with the latest results, and he said, this has really got them puzzled. When you look closely at this, nothing you see on the surface of the Sun fits the old, centuries-old standard model of what a star is. It's as simple as that. Not a single thing that you see on the surface of the Sun or above it fits that model. All of this activity, you see, this is defying gravity. And even when it falls back, it doesn't fall back according to gravitational laws. And here's a star hurling billions of tons of matter at high speeds, hundreds of kilometres a second, somewhat out into space. How does it do that if gravity is holding it together? Fred Hoyle once said the standard model would suggest that the Sun's atmosphere would finish a few hundred kilometres above the surface. But this stuff is reaching to the edge of the solar system. We live in the atmosphere of the Sun. And because that atmosphere is electrified, we have something going on between the Sun and the Earth which is not recognised by astrophysicists. And of course, the climate scientists rely on the astrophysicists to tell them where the energy inputs are into our climate system. This is completely ignored. It's a major driver of our weather systems. In fact, you can almost predict what the weather, how the weather will fare in the future by looking at the Sun's activity. There was a chap at our meeting earlier this year, Piers Corbyn, who does long-range forecasting based on looking at the Sun and the effect on the electrical upper atmosphere, the ionosphere of the Earth. And he's so accurate that he was able to predict that that big storm that was heading towards New York and they thought was going to flood New York would turn away at the last minute. It did. He predicted that there would be 3 years of flooding with 1 year interregnum without any flooding at around 2010, 2010, missed 2011 and then 2012 in England. The Weather Bureau there was forecasting barbecue weather for the summer. They had the floods that Piers predicted in advance, including the respite in 2011. And then he said 2012 would be the worst of all, and it was. Twinkle, twinkle, electric star, scientists don't know what you are. That's a pretty sobering thought. Because what we know about the sun, we project out into deep space and say, that's what's going on out amongst all these different stars. But what you find then is you've got to have a different theory for every different looking star. And this is what's happened. The electric universe explains them all with one model. This is what Ralph Jurgens wrote. The modern astrophysical concept that ascribes the sun's energy to thermonuclear reactions deep in the solar interior is contradicted by nearly every observable aspect of the sun. And nothing has changed. That was back in 1980. Now this is interesting because the standard story that you'll see Brian Cox give tonight about how the solar system is formed is this swirling cloud of gas and dust around a forming star. And then somehow, and the word somehow is used a lot, the planets are formed out of that great cloud of dust and gas. It's never been shown how you do that. I mean, Saturn's ring should be forming moons, but it doesn't. This is how stars are formed, along these filaments. Dot, 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 and up there, and further up there. This is equivalent to a lightning bolt, cloud-to-cloud lightning. And in those clouds, the matter that's distributed in the cloud is drawn very powerfully towards that central discharge, just like in a lightning bolt. In fact, that's what causes the thunderclap. You've got material that's drawn into the central discharge, heated, and then as soon as the lightning bolt's finished, of course, it then expands again, and then you get the thunderclap. Of course, you can't hear a thunderclap in space, but what you do end up with here is, in effect, bead lightning, and those beads are stars. What you can't see are the smaller objects, which are the gas giants and other planets. So when that discharge fades, all of these objects are in a string, and of course that's unstable, so the gravity then takes over. And they come together to form planetary systems, and that's why they look so weird. It's whatever happens, it just depends on where the objects were at the end of the lightning strike and how they were travelling at that instant as to what your solar system looks like. It's also been discovered that the stars flicker at an incredible rate. According to the gravitational accretion theory, everything happens over a long period of time. But they've seen the brightness of young stars varying by 20% over a few weeks. Now, lightning flickers. Stars flicker. It's all electric. It explains all of these wonderful structures. There's a star right in the middle of all that. And what's happened here is that there's sufficient material in the plasma surrounding it that we can actually see the circuit. And you can see the circuit is quite beautiful, but it's also complex, just like those petroglyphs that I showed earlier. Complex shapes. They're beautiful. Professor Don Scott and I are working, in fact we'll be together next month. We're trying to figure out the details of this circuit, because it is a little complicated, as you can see. So, what do we understand about gravity? Bugger all. That's an astronomy magazine from, I think it was last year, or maybe the year before. Is there something we don't know about gravity? Yes, we don't know a damn thing. As Sir Oliver Lodge said back in 1921, this was at about the time when Einstein was proposing his theories of relativity, and the second one, the general theory, is supposed to explain gravity. It doesn't. It describes it mathematically, and that's all mathematics can do. It can describe things. It's a shorthand way of putting observations that may stretch over pages and pages of data up in a graph or into a formula. But it doesn't explain it. All it does is it's a shorthand representation. And when you project it into extra dimensions like Einstein did, then you're in real trouble. As Sir Oliver Lodge said, if a special geometry has to be invented in order to account for a falling apple, even Newton might be appalled at the complications which would ensue when really difficult problems are tackled. And that's exactly right. I rather like Sir Oliver Lodge. He was a very clever man. So how will we view Einstein in future? As a rather victim of circumstance, I think, because he was exalted by people around him who wanted to raise their status. Sir Arthur Eddington is the principal culprit, and he was the one who gave us the standard model of the sun as well, so he's got a lot to answer for. But it's this guy, Don Hodson, who's a natural philosopher, said, everyone who takes relativity seriously believes in the reality of at least one direction in which one cannot point. And he said, point me in the direction of time. Hang on a minute. But a dimension has length and it has, dimension has length and it has direction. So you can't point in the direction of time. And it's funny because I think I have a video here which will demonstrate the problem. E equals mc squared, everyone's heard of it. It's bandied about like some sort of magical set of runes. It's the best known though, and the most misunderstood equation in science, because if you ask a physicist what E equals, he'll give you examples, but he won't explain it. If you ask what m is, he'll say it's mass. And then you say, well, why are you talking about matter later on? Because they both start with the letter m. But mass is a property of matter. And yet you'll go to encyclopedias and find the two confused within a few sentences. And that has given rise to the idea that you can tell what a body is made of by testing its gravitational field. You can't. Because mass does not represent the amount of matter in a body. So the sun could have an iron core and a hydrogen atmosphere, for all we know. Just because we measure it, we say, oh, this density is so-and-so, so it must be made mostly of hydrogen. No, it's nonsense. And when you look at this comet, this one that they're trying to land on, it looks like rock. And I say it is rock, simply because they measure the gravity of the thing and they say, oh, it's mostly fluff. It doesn't look like fluff. These are the sorts of problems we face in physics, and this is the sort of thing I'd love to see school children faced with, so that they could go away and think about it. It's when you were given a problem, it's like when Velikovsky opened up this idea to me, I was away, that was it. I had to find the answers, and I think this is how you inspire kids to do science, not to get them to learn stuff like E equals mc squared and parrot it, and then think they know what it means. They don't. So science took a seriously wrong turn in the 1920s, just after the Great War, as I said. Those who followed Einstein bequeathed us a disconnected, incoherent universe that simply cannot function or give rise to life. That is probably the most important take-home message. This is what Einstein bequeathed us. Quantum theory is incompatible with gravitational theory. Einstein made sure of that by the way he postulated his theories. Oliver Lodge again, caricature of him on the right. He said, what is really wanted for a truly natural philosophy is a supplement to Newtonian mechanics expressed in terms of the medium which he suspected and sought but could not attain, and introducing the additional facts, chiefly electrical. This guy had it right. This is back at the same time as Einstein was doing his work. The thing is, the kids aren't taught the arguments that went on at the time. If the kids were taught that, they'd get an idea, well, hang on a minute, that looks like a good argument. Why don't we hear about that? They're not taught it. And I think that's a serious failure of education, this idea that there's a story and that's the only one you're going to hear.
Oh. So I have a question on science, actually. His question is for Brian Smith, because he's very interested in physics. He's starting high school next year. And his question is, how can something as infinitely large as the universe actually get bigger?
Yes, this is always a problem, infinity getting bigger. So, if you think of the universe, when we measure the universe, it, as near as we can tell, is very close to being infinite in size. That is, we can only see 13.8 billion light years of it, because that's how old the universe is. But we're pretty sure there's a lot more universe beyond the part we can see, which light just simply can't get to us. And our measurements are such that we actually think that very nearly that may go out, well, thousands of times beyond what we can see, and perhaps an infinite distance. So imagine you have an infinite universe, which I say is expanding. Well, that universe is actually embedded in 4 dimensions. It's this way,
Here you go.
it's
Watch
that
this.
way, it's that way, and then there's time.
Time goes that
And
way.
so as the universe gets bigger, essentially we are moving in this 4-dimensional space, and we're sort of where something else was in the past, but we're in the future. And so we're progressing in this 4-dimensional space in the future. And I always say there's a problem with 4-dimensional spaces. It's very hard to visualize. And indeed, I've never met a sane person who can visualize 4 dimensions, and you don't want to be one of the people who can. So ultimately, we're expanding into the future. But think of it this way. In school, you will have done this little experiment in math where you'll put a ray starting at 0, and it'll go out 1, 2, 3, and off infinity, little arrow, goes off forever. Now I can multiply that by 2. So 0 stays at 0, 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 4, 4 goes to 8, and you can do that for any number you want, all the way up to infinity. And that's sort of what the universe is doing. Infinity is just getting bigger, and we're allowed to do that in mathematics. That's what's so cool about it.
Brian, your Nobel team not only proved the universe is expanding, but at an accelerating rate, and that seems to be critical. But what does it mean? What are the implications?
Well, it means that the galaxies that we see are moving away from us faster and faster, such that eventually they will be moving so fast away from us that the light they emit will no longer be able to reach us. So we will be in the future looking out into a universe which is literally void of galaxies. Our own galaxy, turns out, is not expanding because we have a lot of gravity here, but expanding 13.5 billion years ago. But the rest of the universe will be accelerated out of sight, and so I will be unemployed in the future.
Yes, you probably won't be around to see it. Peter, you made a point, I think, quite a point to me while Brian was speaking.
You know, I just told you earlier on, physicists are the smartest people on earth, and there you have it.
There you have it. They're the smartest people on earth. Yeah.
I've always wondered, if you're assuming everything is travelling away from us, doesn't that assume that we are the centre of the universe?
We are, yeah.
And isn't that the most stupid thing?
Well, one of the crazy ideas is that there is no centre, and they use that dots on a balloon as an example.
But all the systems have always been predicated on Z.
There's more to it than that, but the point is that what he's saying is physically meaningless. And this is our Nobel Prize winning Professor Brian Schmidt. I go to the meetings, I sit near him sometimes, and this is the sort of nonsense that the PhD candidates have to get put up with. It really is, it is sheer nonsense.
And that poor kid's expression on his face was...
Yeah, well, so what? Yeah, so what? What's that got to do with anything? And you'll notice it's hopeless. At the end, everything disappears and you're left on your own. Say, oh, wonderful. So, I think it's probably time for a break. Okay, we've got to move this along. This is a well-known astronomer, fellow of the Wallace Society, and she's won various awards for the discovery of little green men, which was later called pulsars. It was a signal that they found from radio telescope signals. But she said, a nice simple picture, I wouldn't call it simple, is getting messier and messier and messier. Sometimes you discover the picture you thought you had, everybody thought we had, turns out to be wrong. The problem is that everyone says they're going back to the drawing board every time these weird discoveries are made, but they leave what was on the drawing board there and scribble around the edges. They don't wipe the board clean and start again. Too scary. But those new concepts are already here. This is Halton up again with one of those plasma balls. As I said, most of the visible universe is made of plasma, and so we have to concentrate on the behaviour of plasma. And this is something that astrophysicists do in a crippled way. They treat it as a gas, and they talk about explosions. You'll see lots of references to explosions. but it's an electrical conductor. So what is an electric universe? The universe is of unknown age and extent, following Halton Arp's research. There was no Big Bang. The universe is not expanding. There is only one force necessary. This simplifies things, and this is the way science was going before the beginning of the 20th century. Not expanding, not creating new particles and new forces to try and win a Nobel Prize. It's a completely wrong way of doing things. The electric force connects all matter instantly, and it has to do so for coherence of not only of stars and galaxies, but also of living creatures. Space is not empty. There has to be an ether. This is what they used to call it. Maxwell's electromagnetic equations required an ether. You cannot wave nothing. You cannot send a wave through nothing. And that's never been addressed because Einstein dismissed it with one of his postulates and never explained how Maxwell's equations could still work. And time travel is impossible because everything's connected in real time. The only way to go backwards in time is to rewind the entire universe, and I don't think even Doctor Who can do that. Unfortunately, I used to enjoy the old Doctor Who.
Yep.
Before they got all virtual reality. So the sun as an electrical body is a tornadic lightning ball. And all we're seeing is the top of a surface which is way above the actual sun, which is that inner circle yellow there. Then it has a tan-coloured atmosphere, which can be 100,000 kilometres deep or more. And then at the top of that, right at the very top of the ionosphere of the sun, is this lightning discharge. And then above that is what's called an anode glow. That's that red glow that you see during a total solar eclipse sometimes when all of the bright light is gone, you get that red ring. That's a typical anode glow. In other words, the positively charged electrode in a gas discharge, it glows red. And then above that you have the corona. Now it's ironic that electrical engineers talk about the coronal discharge from high voltage power lines. In other words, a high voltage power line in certain weather conditions will glow simply because it's emitting charged particles into what appears to be just thin air. Well, the sun emits charged particles into what appears to be thin air. So the naming in that case was apt. The electricity to light the sun comes externally from the galaxy. I showed you those big lightning bolts that hurtle through clouds. They don't go away. They remain in a very diffuse form, which you cannot see, but radio astronomers can pick up. This superheated corona is then no longer a problem. Now, why is this corona millions of degrees and the surface of the sun is stone cold at 5,000 degrees by comparison? And the answer is that the energy is coming from outside the sun. That electrical energy is giving the corona that apparent high temperature. This is our pale blue dot, as they call it. This was a backward look at the Earth by, I think it was one of the Voyager mission spacecraft. And Carl Sagan said, all of human history has happened on that tiny pixel, shown there inside the blue circle, which is our only home. And if only all of the men behaving badly on the planet right now could get that perspective, maybe they'd just pause and think for a moment what they're doing. Modern astronomy has a disconnected, hopeless view of the universe. It's a vision of lonely bodies in space, self-immolating stars, using up their own body to light the darkness, drifting like dust motes in the blackness and the clockwork solitude of the planets. The electric universe shows unity. The powerful electric force connects all matter from inside the atom to our planetary system to clusters of galaxies, leaving little room for the disconnected fragments of modern theory. The origins of rock art are from these plasma formations, as I showed you before, and the squatter man is a typical example and a very widespread one. And that's where you get a figure which has the arms and legs out at right angles and these two dots between the elbows and the knees. And the question is, what the heck are those dots doing there? But you'll find them repeated in North America and Europe, and even some of the Aboriginal lightning brothers shows lightning coming from the elbows and the knees. Wherever there's a sharp bend, you'll get lightning effects. So, the origins of rock art are prehistoric. The rock art forms are identical to the many forms generated by instabilities in high-energy plasma discharges, and there's been about 84 different patterns found, and almost all of them are represented in rock art. So it wasn't just doodling, it wasn't aliens, it was something that was seen in the sky, and the effort required to cut into that rock, and Tony Pratt actually tried it because he was examining the actual petroglyphs. He said, it is not easy, it's damn hard work. So what they were doing was trying to represent something that would last for a long time, to try and tell people in the future what had happened to our ancient forebears. This new understanding is of profound significance in understanding our real history, both of the Earth and of humanity. It explains a lot about our irrational behaviour, because people who've suffered a terrible event in their life often suffer amnesia. They forget it, they suppress the memory. But it doesn't go away. The subconscious then forces them to repeat the catastrophe, whatever it was, but often on others. So you get warlike behaviour, that kind of thing. And I don't think we're ever going to heal from this repeated pattern of misbehaviour until we understand ourselves. And this is why it's important to understand our real history, because only then can we heal. Lost knowledge. Francis Bacon said, man prefers to believe what he prefers to be true. That ancestral Wandjina figure, by the way, is from Donkey Creek up in the Kimberleys. And Yuva Melnick I wrote to, and I got permission to use this image from her book, Yoro Yoro. She went up there and lived with these people and spoke to the elders to try and get their stories and to record them. The book's worth reading. But of particular significance is their cosmology, if you like. And the Wandjina figure has all of the features of an eye god. These weird eyes and the various things that were in this image are described by these elders, and they tried to make certain that it wasn't misinterpreted. And for instance, Malangiri, the lightning ring, is the first or closest to the head. The line between the eyes indicates where the power flows down and is not a nose. Trying to tell you that even though it looks anthropomorphic, it's not. It's actually representing something. The power flows down from above. This gives you a completely different view of Aboriginal legends and so on, the Dreamtime legends. It means that we should study them, treat them with respect, use them as a source of information, not just discard them as sort of childhood kind of stories. So I'll state my preference. I believe what the ancients had to tell us about the thunderbolts of the planetary gods, since it illuminates many aspects of the electric universe and confirms ancient testimony. What I was trying to do, I wasn't doing this work looking at the ancient legends, that was the work of my colleague Dave Talbot and several others. I was trying to figure out how I could explain these things in terms of common sense and plain physics, not the imaginary mathematician stuff. The other thing is that this is easy to verify. Because these patterns are so striking, you can test the theory quite well. Plasma mythology. This was an artist who sent this to me a few years ago and said I might like to use it. Plasma discharge phenomena are complex and lifelike. Remember how those filaments in the plasma ball move around as if they're alive. A lot of the words that we use to describe what was happening in the heavens refer to living things, living beings, snakes and so on. You know, the rainbow serpent and dragons breathing fire. The heavens were their arena. It's where the planetary gods played out a celestial drama and fought each other with cosmic thunderbolts. the creation myth. This shows you a solar flare, which gives you some idea of the complexity of some of these plasma formations. It looks like a winged being almost. Words such as land, cosmos and even universe are usually the words of the translators and do not connote the original meaning of the words. The kingdom of heaven was the celestial creation event. They saw these things happening in the sky, creating what looked like the house of the gods. What is usually meant by such words in the original is the celestial land of the gods. And creation refers to the generation of that celestial apparition. It has nothing to do with the creation of the universe. It just makes sense that that's the case. You can even go so far as decoding Stonehenge. And like all great prehistoric constructions, it was built to commemorate the stupendous electrical phenomena seen in the prehistoric sky. And we can tell that because the 56 Aubrey holes mimic the discharge pattern seen in the lab below. These high-intensity discharges break up into particle beams, which drill holes in the plate. And so it was seen in the sky as 56 streamers, and so there are 56 Aubrey holes surrounding the central part of Stonehenge. These are the two DVDs that we've produced about this, Symbols of an Alien Sky, Part 1 and 2. The first one shows the profound effects on the Earth and human witnesses. And the second one talks about the electrical scarring of Mars. Now, I had divided my talk into two. That was the end of part 1, so if you'll just bear with me a minute and I'll switch over to the second part. If I can find it. Here we go.
DVDs are actually on the internet if anybody has got enough bandwidth to stream them. There's one on YouTube and the links on Wallace website.
That's true, yes. There's an awful lot of DVDs and YouTube videos on the Thunderbolts website. I'm going to need a faster computer the way this is going. Here we go. The question then is there life elsewhere in the universe? And this is the kind of thing that NASA's spending billions of dollars with plans to send people to Mars and so on, because Mars is considered to be a prime candidate to look at for signs of earlier life. So the question is, what happened to Mars? A planetary mystery. And I'll just play a little bit of this video from NASA.
Billions of years ago, when the planets of our solar system were still young, Mars was a very different world. Liquid water flowed in long rivers that emptied into lakes and shallow seas. A thick atmosphere blanketed the planet and kept it warm. In this cozy environment, living microbes might have found a home, starting Mars down the path toward becoming a second light-filled planet next door to our own. But that's not how things turned out. Today, Mars is bitter cold and desiccated. The planet's thin, wispy atmosphere provides scant cover for a surface marked by dry riverbeds and empty lakes. If Martian microbes still exist, they're probably eking out a meager existence somewhere beneath the dusty Martian soil. What happened? This haunting question has long puzzled scientists. To find the answer, NASA is sending a new orbiter to Mars called MAVEN. The goal of MAVEN is to figure out what processes were responsible for those changes in Martian climate, says Bruce Tchaikovsky, principal investigator for MAVEN at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Scheduled for launch in November 2013 and due to arrive in September 2014, MAVEN is bristling with instruments to study Mars' upper atmosphere. That's where many researchers believe the answer lies. The only way Mars could have been wet and warm 4 billion years ago is if it also had a thick atmosphere. CO2 in the Martian atmosphere is a greenhouse gas, just as it is in our own atmosphere. A thick blanket of CO2 and other greenhouse gases that provided the warmer temperatures and greater atmospheric pressure required to keep liquid water from freezing solid or boiling away. Somehow, Mars lost most of that blanket. One possibility is the solar wind. Unlike Earth, Mars is not protected by a global magnetic field. Instead, it has magnetic umbrellas scattered around the planet that shelter only part of the atmosphere. Erosion of exposed areas by solar wind might have slowly stripped the atmosphere away over billions of years. Recent measurements of isotopes in the Martian atmosphere by the Mars rover Curiosity support this idea. Light isotopes of hydrogen and argon are depleted compared to their heavier counterparts, suggesting that they have been lost to space. Scientists have also speculated that the planet's surface might have absorbed the CO2 and locked it up in minerals such as carbonate. However, while carbonates have been found on the surface, they aren't present in enough abundance to account for an early, thick atmosphere. MAVEN will be the first mission to Mars specifically designed to help scientists understand the ongoing escape of CO2 and other gases into space. The probe will orbit Mars for at least one Earth year. At the elliptical orbit's low point, MAVEN will be 125 kilometers above the surface. Its high point will take it more than 6,000 kilometers out into space. MAVEN's instruments will track ions and molecules in this broad cross-section of the Martian atmosphere, thoroughly documenting the flow of CO2 and other molecules into space for the first time. MAVEN's instruments also will measure the solar energetic inputs into the Martian upper atmosphere and the atmospheric response. This will allow us to determine the processes that are responsible for that loss to space. Once Joukowsky and his colleagues know how quickly Mars is losing CO2 right now, and what might be causing that loss, they can extrapolate backward in time to estimate the total amount lost during the last 4 billion years. MAVEN will determine if loss to space was the most important player in driving Martian climate change, Joukowsky says. In the grand scheme of the solar system, Earth orbits alongside a world that began with as much promise for life as our own, yet turned out so differently. After all these years, MAVEN could write the final chapter in a haunting planetary mystery.
You'll notice that that assumes the 4 billion year history of the solar system. The questions are, was there ever a 4.6 billion year old clockwork solar system? What is the real story of planet formation? And also the atmosphere and ocean formation. There's no explanation for the Earth's atmosphere or the water, the amount of water we've got so close to the sun. And it also assumes the past was like the present, so that by measuring the present loss of atmosphere and so on into space by this MAVEN spacecraft, you can retro-calculate back billions of years. This is a favourite trick of geologists and astronomers. They assume a clockwork solar system. But this model, as I said, the solar nebula model of formation of planets, has no successful predictions to its name. Not a single one. Every time something new is discovered, they have to add more barnacles to this idea. There is a better story. Big Bang cosmology sprang from mathematics and religious beliefs. Mathematical mysticism and religious mysticism have been bedfellows ever since the Greeks. So cosmology became a myth. Once upon a time, long, long ago, there was nothing which exploded. And I love that one. It's Terry Pratchett in one of his books. I think that's the most succinct put down. In contrast, the electric universe began by analysing global cosmic myths. So the electric universe is an astounding tale that connects us with the real universe. And we turn to the real evidence that we've been able to piece together, and this takes a forensic approach. It's like having a group of unreliable witnesses and trying to piece together what really happened at a particular event. And you can do that, and that's what Velikovsky showed. And the scholars who work on this and have worked on this for decades have been able to put together quite a coherent story now, and I think I've been able to explain it simply. So, and this is it. The Earth and Mars were once planets orbiting a brown dwarf star. And what's more, it's the most hospitable environment for life to get started. When you think about it, they call the Earth and its position in the solar system the Goldilocks zone. You know, not too hot, not too cold, it's just right, and so on. But this is really a very, what would I call it, precarious position to be in, because there's only a very small band that we could actually successfully create life. And when you think about it, we're told that it takes millions or billions of years for evolution to take place so that you climb out of the mud and become a swimming amoeba or something, and then eventually you become what we are, the pinnacle of creation. This is Darwinism. But what you really need is somewhere that can provide you with an atmosphere and water and the biological molecules naturally. And it's found that brown dwarfs in their atmosphere have all of the requirements. But there is a problem for astronomers. They don't understand what a brown dwarf is. It's like a lot of these things. If you don't understand what the sun is as a star, then you don't understand other stars. And brown dwarfs are thought to be a dwarf, like Jupiter or Saturn, only glowing like a toaster, you know, a dull red. In fact, because all stars are electrical, a brown dwarf is actually quite large. It's got a huge envelope. If, for instance, Jupiter were to turn into a brown dwarf star, its plasmasphere, that envelope around the planet that's formed by the solar wind, if it were to light up, it would be as big as the full moon in the sky. And yet right now most people couldn't pick out Jupiter in the sky, it's just a point of light. But if you can imagine that blown up to the size of the full moon in the sky, that gives you an idea. And of course the moons of Jupiter would orbit within that sphere. So we'll just move on and I'll show you a picture. The other thing is that brown dwarfs were discovered to flare, and this puzzled people because they're supposed to be a failed star, one that didn't quite make it to be a bright star. And as a failed star, it was thought to be less energetic. And therefore, what are they doing flaring? But they've been found to flare, some of them actually get 1,000 times brighter, which is pretty severe. But most of them will flare occasionally, just get a little bit brighter. The reason for that is that brown dwarfs, all red stars, doesn't matter whether they're a giant or a dwarf, so-called, the only way they can adjust to their electrical environment is to shed material, or throw it off. Our sun throws it off, but in a more controlled manner. But dwarfs will throw off bits of their atmosphere and bits of the material inside them and dump them on their moons. That's why everything that's been observed in the solar system, including our moon, asteroids, comets, and other planets, have layers. They're layered. And why are we now here and not with our parent? The reason is that the system broke up on encountering our present sun. This all sounds like science fiction, but the evidence all points this way. And it was interplanetary thunderbolts that stripped the atmosphere and any water and so on, and also kilometres of the northern hemisphere off the planet and hurled it into space and onto the other body that the discharge came from. That's where it went in an instant, so to speak, in geological time. So the Maven mission will not discover anything about the real history of Mars. It may help us by providing us with some more detail and information for the electric universe. As I said earlier, the stars and planets form in cosmic thunderbolts. They all have heavy element cores. The reason for that is that the way the electrical, the thunderbolt works is to pull the heavy elements to the centre and leave the lighter gases out further away. So you cannot form stars of hydrogen this way. You'll form them with heavy element cores and a thick atmosphere of lighter gases. And capture, after the thing fades, forms the solar type systems, as I said. But also stars may electrically fission to produce hot Jupiters. That is, a star, if it becomes electrically unstable, will actually split. That's what's called a nova, where the star flares up and it ejects not just a coronal mass ejection, but a chunk of itself into space. The reason for that is that it then releases a lot of the electrical stress. So you have a lot of binary stars. There's probably almost as many or more binary stars than there are single stars. That's bright stars. And also you find these so-called hot Jupiters. They're orbiting close to their central stars because they were born from that star. And giant planets in turn may fission to form moons or minor planets. So there's a brown dwarf. You've got the sun at the top, a bright star with a bright photosphere. When the voltage drops, the brightness fades because that's an arc discharge, and it fades to a glow discharge and becomes reddish. That's what the brown dwarf is, but it's still huge, as you can see. And then Jupiter's there for comparison, but that's misleading. This is a NASA picture. The brown dwarf is actually as big as the red star behind it, and Jupiter and tiny little Earth. As I said, all red stars are giants simply because of the nature of the discharge, and planets can orbit within their plasma glow. There are no seasons because there is an even temperature over the whole surface. And this is why you find coal in the Antarctic and all of that animal and plant matter that's been smashed up and buried in the northern hemisphere. Because we did have, during the Carboniferous period, the perfect conditions for growing vegetation, that is, red light and even temperatures and water misting out of the sky continually. You didn't have weather like we've got now. And of course ferns and so on are ideally adapted to that kind of environment. And red light is known to help the growth of saplings and so on. In Canberra, in the Arboretum, they use red plastic canopies around the saplings to make them grow faster. So that was the Earth's environment back then, and because the environment was completely electrically different, the gravity on Earth was different too. So I would say all brown dwarf stars are cosmic wombs. That's where life is most likely to be found. And strangely enough, astronomers have come around to the same view, but for a different reason, which I won't go into. So that's what it looks like. And that brown dwarf we now call Proto-Saturn. This is Saturn as a star. And it had this glowing shell around it, which is an electrical phenomenon. And the Earth and Mars, and a whole lot of other bodies, but I've just pointed out the Earth and Mars there, were orbiting that central body. And that was the condition which is referred to as the Garden of Eden and so on. It was a time when the vegetation was so lush, there was no such thing as farming. You didn't have to go chasing food, it was just there to be had. So you can get an idea that there was a yearning to go back to that time after everything fell apart. After we went through what was called the twilight of the gods and the Thimble winter and all these references to a time of terrible cold, because once we were thrown out of that, we were in dire straits, and we had periods of intense heat when we came close to the sun, like a comet. And as we moved away, we had intense cold. So we had a period that's remembered as being chaotic in terms of weather. Huge red plasma glow. It was called the purple dawn of creation because these stars have a red light and also there's ultraviolet and the violet end of the spectrum. So the light was remembered as being dim and purple. Now Proto-Saturn, the capture mechanism is electrical, but with gravity involved. With a dim star like that, the electrical stress on all of the bodies in it is less, and the energy, remember we had E equals mc squared before. If the energy is reduced, the mass is reduced, the gravitational field of the body is reduced. So the Earth's gravity, for the dinosaurs to have been able to move about on land the way we say they did, the Earth's gravity would have had to have been about a third of what it is now. So gigantism was normal. Those huge birds, like small aircraft, could fly without breaking their wings. The atmosphere was thicker. There was more oxygen in the atmosphere. The conditions were quite different to what they are now. The electrical capture takes place because the mass of these bodies is changing. There's an exchange of energy, and this is the problem the gravity models fail to address, because anything coming in from outer space, deep space, will just swing in around the sun and then head off and disappear again, never to be seen. To capture a body, the incoming one has to lose energy. And in this case, it's the transfer of electrical energy between the sun and Proto-Saturn. Proto-Saturn became a giant comet, in effect, and we were sitting in the tail. Those little yellow dots there are Venus, Mars and Earth trailing behind. So when the Cassini mission was to visit Saturn, I wrote an article called Cassini's Homecoming, because here we were visiting our home star. And of course Saturn still has this gorgeous ring of ice, water ice, which shows that's where we got our water from, this object here, Saturn. And Saturn's moon Titan, here was the case where I was able to predict what would be found once the Huygens lander went through the clouds to look at the surface beneath. And I predicted they would find a surface that looked very much like Mars and Venus and so on. It was expected instead by the scientists that they would find an ocean of methane, because Titan has a very thick atmosphere. Its atmospheric pressure on the surface is about equal to that of the Earth, but it's mostly nitrogen. But it's also losing methane into space. And of course the astronomers did their retro calculation and said, oh gosh, if it's still losing methane after 4 billion years, it must have had a complete ocean down there under the cloud cover. I was the only one to predict right, because when the Huygens craft got beneath the clouds and photographed the surface, it found that I made a negative of that picture and turned it around and showed that this is in effect a lightning bolt that's travelled across the surface. And it's the same kinds of things you see on Venus and Mars, because lightning bolts have sculpted the surfaces of Earth, Mars and Venus. So what looks like rivers is not. The rivers generally take the course of an old thunderbolt. You can see it here, even just flying down the east coast of Australia. The mountain ridge formations are not created by anything on Earth. They're created by lightning discharges running across the surface of the planet and just gouging huge channels and creating that ridge structure, that ridge and gully. So Earth was a former Saturnian. All our water came during that period of abundant life on Earth in the Proto-Saturnian arrangement. So we're Titan's big brother. The question is why all the water? Brown dwarfs flare and deposit minerals and gases on their satellites. And the rings of Saturn are water ice remnant of flaring activity. And it explains the layering seen on planets and moons. We've got mineral deposits on Earth that are inexplicable. Even the iron deposits in Western Australia are not really explicable. Here's a heavy element and it's on the surface. And what's it doing there? And also when you look at Mars, a lot of the Martian soil was dumped on the Earth. So these red deserts and so on, and these big deposits like we've got in WA, are probably Martian soil that we're mining. You can explain the water and mineral deposits on Earth. And we come to Venus. Venus is also Saturn's child, and it was born during this process of trying to adjust to the sun's, this new environment, here our present sun. And the ancients saw Venus actually ejected from Saturn. And it was the great, the worm Ouroboros, you know, the one that swallowed its tail. It was ejected, and there's a stream of matter that followed it in a ring until it actually bit its own tail. And so that was the formation of Saturn's ring at the same time, that the remnant is Saturn's ring. But because of the changing environment, all the time this was happening, we were approaching the sun closer and closer, and the effects were becoming more severe on this arrangement. It became unstable. And so eventually it fell apart. But one other feature of Venus that can be explained easily by this model is that when a blob of matter like Venus is shot off from Proto-Saturn, you can imagine if Saturn's rotating like that, the matter comes off here at an angle and it's spinning backwards. And Venus is the only planet in the solar system that has, in effect, a backward rotation. It's very slight, but Venus was only there for a short time. So the backward rotation is explained. When the surface was investigated by the radar Magellan spacecraft and the Russian and American landers on Venus, they said this is a surprisingly young surface. And they had to invent a resurfacing event, a global resurfacing event, because of course it has to be 4 billion years old. No, it's only about 20,000 years old. It has a hellish temperature, having been born recently from the mass of a brown dwarf star. I mean, you could melt some metals on the surface there. And those planet-girdling filamentary scars are caused by equatorial cosmic discharges through a thick atmosphere. The thicker the atmosphere, the more filamentary the discharge is, so that you get that beautiful fine filigree sort of pattern. So all of that's explained. High temperatures, thick atmosphere, the pattern on the surface is backward rotation, all by one simple model. And the ancients actually said this is what happened. All we've got to do is let go of our preconceptions for a moment, our old beliefs, and try the idea out. And here's battle-scarred Mars, with Valles Marineris featuring there right dead centre. That scar stretches 1/3 of the way across the planet, and it's up to 9 kilometres deep. So there's 9 kilometres of material just torn out of that surface, because you can't find it. Although when the first landers got on Mars, they found rubble strewn to the horizon, so some of it fell back, but some of it went into orbit. The moons of Mars, Phobos and Deimos, are bits of Mars that have got wafted into space. And someone has suggested that Ayers Rock looks very much like Phobos, and it's just a rock dump there in the middle of the desert. It could just as well, since most of the iron ore in the west is probably Martian soil, this might have been one of the minor bits of Mars that did a crash landing on Earth. So Mars was stripped of rocks and atmosphere and water. And we're still receiving Mars rocks on Earth today. We're still getting Martian meteorites landing today. So this is more or less confirmation of this idea. And the evidence of Mars battles with cosmic thunderbolts is written hugely on its Scarface. And the North American Indians called Mars Scarface. So Mars was close enough to be seen at some point in human memory, which means it would have been either as close as the moon or closer. This is the picture of that scar looking west. That's what ended the Valles Marineris. Now these parallel gouges are typical of an arc that's travelled across the surface, an electrical arc. Water can't do that. And there are hanging valleys and all sorts of crisscrossing channels further on. It's called the chaos region. And then the scar curves down to the left. At the other end of the channel, the scars turn up to the right. And for years I looked at that and trying to figure out what exactly happened. And then NASA published a picture, and I understood in an instant, because it showed this barred spiral galaxy shape. Remember I said a spiral galaxy is the largest cosmic example of what a thunderbolt can do. This is written right across Mars' face. So we have misunderstood Mars. The story of Mars is far more dramatic and catastrophic than anything dreamt up by theorists or imagined by science fiction writers. Martian geological history is a myth. They're already writing out history like the one for the Earth, with Noachian, Hesperian, all this sort of rubbish. It's just a story, it's made up. And the maiden mission will only add confusion. And the comforting dogma of evolution in place for 4 billion years seems to require extraordinary disproof. We're so attached to these stories that we seem almost incapable of seeing evidence that's disproving it. This is something that science doesn't address, the psychology behind science, and it's something that's desperately needed, I think. What about life? And here we get to what does the electric universe signify for life? Jerry Pollack I met a couple of years ago, and he's now a key member of the group, if you like. And he has shown how essential water is to life. And he's shown that water is an amazing substance. It can actually transfer information within the cell in the form of a gel, and the gel itself has a structure, and that structure can transfer the information from, say, a DNA molecule from one end of the cell to the other. So it's not a case of molecules just wandering about waiting until they find, the key for the lock. The water itself is absolutely essential to transmit information within the cell. In fact, he said life is structured water, and this is a little bit of one of his talks at our conference last year.
The water inside the cell is not like this water here. It's actually water that is structured in some way, organized. And the idea was that next to protein surfaces, which are charged and have hydrophilic regions, the water would build up into some sort of ordered structure. And that the inside of your cells and my cells were filled with water. And most scientists today don't really think of water as being important. They think of water as being, well, as I said, just like that. However, we all know that we're 2/3 water, approximately. And if you translate that 2/3 into the number of molecules, because the water molecule is so small, it turns into more than 99% of our molecules are water molecules. So they've got to be important for something. So I actually took off on this. It wasn't so long ago, about 10 years ago, starting from Gilbert Ling. And the idea that the water inside the cell was critical to any kind of cell function. And I wrote the book.
If you want to see the whole video, this is a YouTube video on the Thunderbolts website. There's a whole string of them there. So that's very important. Water, or life is structured water, so you must have water. And then we have the question of consciousness and all of the activity that's going on right now, and large sums of money being spent examining the brain, trying to figure out how it works, how the mind works. And Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, who is a good friend of mine, has pointed out this is completely the wrong way of looking at consciousness.
I think we've reached the very peculiar position today, to summarise all of what I've been saying, that people claim that the consciousness is nothing but the brain, and they claim that in the name of science. And yet, science itself has moved on. Science has now gives us plenty of evidence that consciousness is much more than just the brain. And it's an ironic fact that people who claim to be defending the scientific worldview show so little interest in science itself. Basically what it has become is a dogmatic ideology. And I think it's an ideology which is severely holding science back. It's something which is preventing inhibiting genuine exploration of consciousness, and is actually pseudo-scientific, pretends to be scientific, but is not. And I think actually the paradigm change that's going on at the moment is very profound. It's actually a complete change in the way we see consciousness from the mind as nothing but the brain view, which has dominated science for well over a century, to a much more curious, open-minded investigation of what's really going on.
I spoke to Rupert after the conference where he spoke, and that YouTube video is also available on our website. And I said to him before he wrote the book, he should have spoken to me, because unfortunately it includes a few ideas that he's got from, of course, the standard idea of the universe and how it works. The electric universe suggests that this connection, this electrical connection, occurs between all matter. I mean, scientists know that one mass held in one hand and the other mass in the other hand, the two masses somehow know of each other's existence because they're drawn to one another by gravity. So they know. The sun knows where the earth is right at this instant. The earth knows where the sun is right at this instant. There's a connection. So it's simple to suggest that in biological systems that same connection occurs and it's instantaneous. And when you think about it, it has to be. For all the trillions and trillions of things that are going on in your body right at this instant, to be synchronized and to actually work towards making you a living, functioning being requires that the whole thing's coherent. It has to be. So this was the aspect of it that impinges on Rupert Sheldrake's work. There's another guy who spoke at one of our meetings about a decade ago, and that's Bruce Lipton, a very dynamic character on the stage. And he and he gave me his book and I gave him my CD at that time, but we didn't have DVDs then. And the important message from his work is that the DNA is merely like a toolbox, and you have to tell it what to make. And this is where epigenetics and that comes in, and it's just beginning to surface, it seems, as being a new paradigm. And it goes further than this in the electric universe, though, because what Bruce shows is that the intelligence of every cell in your body resides at the surface of the cell. The receptors on the surface of the cell tune into signals in the blood, hormones and other chemicals that are in the blood. But he said there are also receptors which don't seem to be tuned into anything inside the body, but outside the body. And this is where you get into where is the mind, where is your memory, and what is consciousness. The electric universe says that this ether, which I mentioned before, which pervades everything, is actually composed of neutrinos, which can pass through all matter, but they also are attracted to matter just because they are matter. As I said, all matter is attracted. So we presumably have some kind of and this is the sort of thing that you hear from many of the people in natural therapies and that talk about, an aura of this ether. The sun has its own aura of ether. It's that bends the sunlight around it. Nothing to do with relativity. With this ether, because it's made of matter, it can hold information. And the electric universe says, because you've got repeated patterns, you've got an atom that can hold information about I'm a magnesium atom, I'm an iron atom or an oxygen atom. You get down to the electron, it knows it's an electron because of its structure. But then you can go, how far down do you go? And at each level there's more and more information. So the information that the universe can contain just in the ether is phenomenal. And because everything's connected, and this gives you an idea of maybe why we're here. We're here to learn because the universe learns through us. We are the self-referential part of the universe. That's why we're important.
I did some studying with Bruce earlier this year, and he's just a cuddly koala of a man. He's just gorgeous.
That's right, yeah, he bounces around this.
His first thing, he says, you're all, if anybody sitting here thinks that their genetics are to blame for anything, he said, I'm telling you that what changes the protein molecules in the cell to keep them moving is the electromagnetic frequency of the belief, the pattern that you are picking up on your beliefs, and that changes the proteins to form. So if you believe you are going to get breast cancer, for instance, then that's what the electrical signal is telling the breast, therefore you get it. He's just fascinating. And it all ties in with everything.
That's how oncologists can point the bone at people and predict very successfully.
That's pointing the bone. Pointing the bone is the best analogy. Because the Aborigines used to wander off into the desert and die because they knew they were going to die. They were told they were going to die. The doctor does the same thing to you.
Put simply in other ways, the universe will react to your picture of reality, or
yes,
what you see.
That's right. what you think is not contained in here is out there. Yeah.
In among the actual words of the Buddha that were recorded, one of the things that struck me that he said was the mind is everywhere. It fills every space like water.
Mm. Yeah, the great philosophers have intuitively known this, I think.
Yeah, so too.
Yeah, because when you think about it, it makes sense. You have to have this kind of connectedness. You can't be just a chemical machine. This mechanistic view of life is nonsense.
Gary Sporch was recently saying to look at ourselves, oh here it is, to look at ourselves as like a TV screen.
That's right.
Is the TV screen making the movie it's playing or the signal?
Mm.
No, it's only receiving it. So he said when the body dies, the signal's still coming in, it's just the receptor's gone.
Yes.
I find him fascinating as well.
Yeah, the research that Gary Schwartz and others have done, Professor Stevenson, the guy who did reincarnation studies in India, all of those point to the fact that who we are is more than our appearance. Yeah, we're like a projection of something beyond us. And when I think
We're
about...
only tuning into one channel usually.
Yes, that's right, yeah. The twins, identical twins, tune to the same station. And so you get these weird effects where they seem to repeat, even if they're separated, they do similar things through their life. Yeah, he'll be speaking at our conference next June in Phoenix. I had met him before, the same time that we had Bruce Lipton and Gary Schwartz and Rupert Sheldrake all at the same meeting some years ago. That was great. In fact, that was the time when we visited the Grand Canyon. That was my first visit, and I had a surreal experience myself because they asked me to describe how the Grand Canyon was formed. And here's me, I'm Australian, I've never been to the Grand Canyon. And I explained it on the bus to the crowd, and we got there into the visitor centre and went inside, and they looked at the three-dimensional picture on the wall. It's one of those, what do they call them, relief maps. And they looked at it and they said, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And then I was out later on the rim of the south rim of the Grand Canyon. I could hear voices in the distance saying, this was formed by lightning. Oh, wow, It was weird. And I got stranded there that night, and I knew Rupert Sheldrake was staying there, so I rang him up and he said, there's a spare bed in the room, so I stayed with him that night. And we saw the sunrise over the Grand Canyon the next morning. So that,
and DNA talks to DNA, so you thought you might have been sleeping, but you're actually exchanging frequencies.
Yeah, it's just the language, I suppose. The electric universe gives you another view of what's going on, and it's actually the sort of thing that Tesla was working with, and that's the longitudinal electric force. So it's not that kind of frequency, it's pull on the rope frequency. And that's the direct connection. If you wave a rope, it takes some time for the signal to get down there, but if you pull on it, you feel at the other end straight away. That's the difference. Yeah, simple as that. So cosmology, a guiding principle is convergence of all human knowledge, not just specialisation. It must provide insights into every discipline, including life itself, consciousness and the human condition. In other words, it must be a truly natural philosophy, as it was in the past. Oh, these are two of my grandchildren. The electric force operates universally and instantly on our scale. All matter is connected resonantly. This resonance again is that longitudinal electric force. And that produces quantum effects. All the mysteriousness of quantum theory, quantum magic goes away once you realise the connection is instantaneous. So the observer is a part of the experiment. It's not spooky at all. Nuclear forces, magnetism and gravity are all manifestations of a single force, and these simple facts are essential for coherence on all scales, from the galactic to the solar system, to life on Earth, and even to atoms. The electric universe is based on simple repeated patterns. Plasma discharge phenomena scale from the lab up to the galactic. Atomic structure scales down to the subatomic and beyond to who knows what. The essential mysteries of origin, purpose and fate remain. The universe holds the information to allow life to gain a foothold wherever it may, and of course they keep discovering life in places they never expected. And because these signals can't be shielded, you can't shield gravity, you can't shield thought. It's funny that we're doing an experiment in Toronto at present to prove that the sun is an electrical phenomenon, and right next door is the laboratory that was used by Dean Radin from the Noetic Institute to test ESP through an electric shield. He showed that ESP operates, doesn't matter what you try and shield it with. And this is why matter connects through, it daisy chains. Doesn't matter what you put in the way, it daisy chains through it. Life exists throughout the universe, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.